Now, the House of Representatives on Tuesday passed for second reading a bill for an act to amend the 1999 Constitution to provide that general elections to the offices of the President, state governors, National Assembly, state houses of assembly, and local government area councils be conducted simultaneously on the same day. Now, the bill, which proposes that the election date be determined by electoral body INEC in consultation with the National Assembly, was sponsored by Yiaga and 34 other lawmakers. When put to a voice vote by the Deputy Speaker Benjamin Kalu, lawmakers overwhelmingly voted in support of the bill.
This is very historic in our nation's democratic history. Coming from a background of worse, voter apathy, crisis, and election manipulation, holding all elections in one day in Nigeria will achieve major things like: one, it will reduce costs. So instead of going 2-3 Saturdays to do this election, paying the same INEC staffs and ad hoc staffs and so on and so forth, we can put all these elections in one basket in one day. Then voter apathy. Normally, when somebody that is supporting a presidential candidate feels the presidential candidate has lost, he may not turn out to vote for state assembly. But now we're going to have supporters of presidential candidates, supporters of senatorial candidates, rep candidates, governorship candidates, state assembly candidates, local government. You can imagine how the polling unit is going to be very busy. And then for election security, now you're going to have almost about 12 agents or 3 agents for one party, times the number of parties participating. So the number of agents in that polling unit has already formed the security ring around the electoral process. And that will ensure that those who normally come to frighten voters and run away, you're going to see not less than 500, 1,000 people in one polling unit. So in terms of reducing costs, all election holding in one day in Nigeria is coming at the right time. In terms of security, it's coming at the right time that people try to snatch ballot and don't want election to be uploaded and so on and so forth. Then in terms of saving hours, so instead of locking down the country for 2-3 Saturdays, we can have all this election in one day.
Well, joining us now is Cynthia Mbamalu, who is the Director of Programs at Yiaga Africa. We also have Nwagu, who is the Executive Director of Pairing Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa. Thank you both for joining us on the news tonight. Well, let me begin with you, Cynthia. When you listen to the lawmaker in that clip that just played, it sounds very simple, makes a lot of sense, common sense. But then you have to ask yourself, why has Nigeria not joined the long list of countries that hold all their elections in one day? In the words of the lawmaker, put them in one basket. What is holding Nigeria back? And then on the other hand, you ask yourself, we have seen our staggered elections and how the electoral body struggles with logistics and many other situations. So the question then is, can INEC realistically conduct all our elections in one day?
Well, I understand the arguments put forward by the lawmaker because, like he mentioned, there is some merit in considering conducting all elections in one day. Things like managing costs, inspiring voter turnout or increasing voter turnout, having citizens engage the electoral process more actively. But I think the conversation around the bill actually is twofold. There is the first part, which is conducting all national elections on one day, but also introduce these local government elections. And I think that is where I would also have my point of divergence is that one, we are a federal system. We have our Nigeria federalism, and within that, local government elections is under the mandate of the State Independent Electoral Commission. And so is the proposal seeking to say on that day, you have INEC conducting the elections for the national, that's the National Assembly, State Assembly, Governor, President, and then you have CIEC conducting that for the local government? Or is this also a way of over-centralizing our system rather than further devolving powers to the 3 levels of government? And I think for me, that is where the mischief lies. Not necessarily the argument around elections in one day. The question is, what elections are we pushing for? And I do believe that if we're pushing for devolving power, we're talking about state police, we're talking about moving more powers to the state level. If we start that conversation and then on one breath we're then asking for local government elections to also be conducted by the Electoral Commission, that in itself for me is a misnomer and is a contradiction to the fight that we're pushing for to strengthen our federal system. So one hand, we can consider conducting elections for the national elections zone one day, perhaps. That is something that we need to have a public conversation around. But on the other breath, for me, the conversation around the local government election should be a separate conversation, because that election is a separate election that is managed by the CX, and it is targeted for the local government structure. And that is because we've also been pushing for local government autonomy. And I think for me, the argument should be, how do we strengthen the local government as a third level or third tier of government to function independently and autonomously, and also have their elections regulated by their own law.
Right. Great points there put forward by Cynthia Mbamalu. Let me bring in Nwagu. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight. So, I mean, for you, what would be the most compelling argument for a single-day election? Over a decade ago, then INEC chairman Atahiru Yiaga had actually proposed the need for, single-day election, saying, look, in terms of energy, in terms of time and money, the staggered election really is not desirable.
Well, listening to the argument, including the one you just mentioned, and what Honorable Gochinyere said, I think what I will say is that it looks very seductive, but it must take into cognizance the big challenge of the humongous number of people that you deploy for elections in our country, for a general election. If you take 2023, for instance, you deployed over 1.5 million ad hoc staff were put into that election. And the big challenge of logistics that you mentioned, where the staggered election is still suffering with perennial logistic challenges. I don't know what conducting election in single day will be. It looks like something that is practicable, but there's got to be a lot of thinking that should go into it. There should be a lot of hard work that will go into it. I do remember that in 2017 that Kenya fell for this and went into the SDE, and immediately it went into that SDE. The first challenge it had was that the election became a disaster, and the Supreme Court had to weigh in and cancel those elections. And so countries that people talk about, they say, oh, Ghana, they talk about Brazil, they talk about the complexion, the nature, character of the political class that we have in Nigeria is one that we also have to put in context when discussing single-day election.
And Cynthia, there's another bill that is around the election, and that's the creation of the National Local Government Electoral Commission to conduct the elections to the local government. Some say that would reduce the influence of the state governors who use local government elections, despite the autonomous power given to them by the Supreme Court to conduct elections and just, enthrone their men in power. But beyond that, I wanted to ask you, because one argument put forward about having all of these elections in one day is to curb the bandwagon effect. But can it really do that? I mean, given the kind of patronage society that we have, would the big, so-called big parties not still influence how these elections turn out?
Well, I think we need to first understand that our political class, they are a very mischievous bunch of individuals within that class, which is why no matter how much we invest in reviewing and reforming our process, we still come back dealing with almost similar issues. And when we make references on the single day elections, I do think if we plan well around it, we can achieve that. Why? There's nothing that makes us so different from every other country within the continent that we can't have a single day elections in Nigeria. However, like I said, my point of deviation is local government elections is at a convention around our federal structure. And so if you bring that to the convention around the National Commission for Local Government Election, I think the bigger question for me is, are we seeking decentralization, or do we want to further centralize what we have? We cannot keep running around circles when it comes to building a federal system that works for Nigeria. We have arguments pushing forward for state police, for instance. We're talking about how do we devolve more powers from the federal to the state, and how do we strengthen local government autonomy. I do believe that it's not every proposal that should be given attention. Why? Currently, we have a state independent electoral commission that needs to be strengthened to function autonomously. And I'll say this, the INEC we have today was one time worse than what it was. I mean, once upon a time, we had an INEC that could not even conduct elections properly. Now, we've managed to build INEC to where it is, and a lot of investment is going to strengthening that body. And so if we invest the kind of attention or the resources we've put into INEC in the CX, it can function better. On the issue around the powers of the governor, let's be clear. When it comes to appointment, there are several safeguards that we can introduce in the Constitution to curb executive excesses that want to ensure that they appoint whomever is loyal to their government. It's the same argument at the national level. We've been talking about power of appointing the INEC chair. And so the mischief we're trying to solve at the state level is also what we're dealing with at the national level, which is why I said our political class, they're just a big challenge to our democracy, if we're being honest. And so for me, the conversation is not creating another body. We can't solve our problems by creating new commissions every time. The commissions we've created are not functioning. Rather, what exists? How can we strengthen those institutions that already exist to work? How can we limit the excesses of the local government, of the state governors?
What about the bandwagon effect, to say, since
the
all the voters are going out at the same time to vote all the positions?
See, that could work for the national elections, and that's why I say we need to clearly delineate these issues. We have the National Assembly, the State Assembly, the governorship, the presidential. There are some merits to having those elections on that day, because the bandwagon effect could also be helpful. If we even look at the trends, after presidential elections, governorship elections will actually become more contentious, sometimes even more violent than the presidential elections. And that is because of the effect or the spillover of the presidential election, which is why I do not have, I do believe that we can sit and review how we can implement a single-day elections for the national elections. But for the local government elections, I still believe that it's a no for me. Let us keep it where it is and strengthen the institution at the state level.
Right, let's bring in Nwagu. I mean, it wasn't always the situation where Nigeria had staggered elections. There was a time when we actually held single-day elections, and one wonders exactly why that was jettisoned and we preferred the staggered election, and now we're going back. You know, like Kasia said, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. It doesn't really matter what system you run. If the people who run the system are not willing to do the right thing, you know, apply the rules and what have you, it doesn't really matter what system. It will still fail. What do you say?
Ngozi, you've captured this more clearly than I could. The truth is that we are always interested in a past. We glorify a past that we rejected at that point in time. This single-day election has been practiced. Why did we go into staggered election? What are the challenges that the single-day election poses for us? For instance, now you have off-cycle elections that are not running the same time with the constitutional hurdle that you require to be able to, you know, merge all these elections in one day, and the deprivation that will cause for those who will ordinarily should have 4 years. What kind of constitutional? So it's part of those excitement that we have once we think that we have a silver bullet to solve one problem. But as we solve that problem, we create another, then we want to go back to where we're coming from. So for me, like Cynthia said, the challenge is not whether we can do this. If we have the resources, if we have the right people, patriotic people who truly think about the country, we should be able to have that. But as we speak today, the huge challenge that confronts us with that, and those who make this argument do not seem, in my view, to understand what it takes to conduct election in Nigeria.
Fantastic. Cynthia, he mentioned the staggered elections, and that looks like it has come to stay in our democracy. Something this bill is also proposing is that governorship election disputes should end at the Court of Appeal and not the Supreme Court. Do you think that this will reduce judicial delays? Also, the issue of credibility when it comes to our electoral system. Will these reforms, apart from the local government, which is a no-no for you, will these reforms bring any sort of credibility to the process?
Well, I think we should ask ourselves, what mischief do we want to solve? And the bigger question is, how much or what's the level of trust in our judicial system? When it comes to elections litigation, the question is not where the final arbiter is or which court is the final bus stop for each elections petition. It's about the integrity of the process. I do not believe that we need to amend the constitution to terminate the elections petition for governorship at the Court of Appeal. No, I do believe that it's important it gets to the Supreme Court. Why? The Court of Appeal operates with different divisions. One major challenge we've had in elections litigation is when we have conflicting judgments from courts of concurrent jurisdiction.
Yes.
And we're likely going to experience a lot more of that. If you look at the Plateau case, for instance, the only saving grace for the governor in Plateau State was the fact that he had the right of appeal to the Supreme Court. Because if you remember, they were on the same case that took away the State Assembly lawmakers, National Assembly.
Indeed,
was on the same, they were on the same boat.
Indeed,
and so for me, I'd rather we have the cases proceed to the Supreme Court. Why? It's easier to manage it if that is the final, if that is the final bus stop for the governorship elections.
All right, thank you so much for your brilliant insights tonight. Thank you. Nwagu is Executive Director, Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa, and Cynthia Mbamalu joining us right here in the studio as Director of Programs, Yiaga Africa. Thank you very much.